Today's video was brought to you by our media partner, Precision Optical Technologies. Precision Optical Technologies, optical networking redefined.
Years, we in the TDR industry have improved upon these pulse widths, and eventually most people had a 25 or a 2 nanosecond pulse width. And when you get down to about a 2 or let's say a 5 nanosecond pulse width, which has a blind spot of anywhere from let's say 3 to 5 or 6 feet, that's when it became the industry standard to say a 6-foot jumper will do. I'm just telling you, that's how we got there. Now, over the years, other manufacturers have come out with a 1 or a sub-nanosecond pulse width. A sub-nanosecond pulse width, when Riserbond came up with that years ago, we called it a sub because it was less than 1 nanosecond. Had a 6-inch blind spot. That literally meant you could see something 6 inches from the front panel of your TDR. But I'm telling you, I'm not saying that all you need now is just a 6-inch jumper, because the truth is you're going to look a little bit silly here trying to connect with this 6-inch jumper and see your screen at the same time. That's not why I tell you that. Understand this. I'm going to go back to my analogies again. If you have ever been out there in the field and your best equipment, your best common sense, your best everything, it was your birthday and the moon was in Aquarius and all was going good, but this has ever happened to you. You found a problem. You dug it up. You fixed it. It was exactly where your TDR said it was supposed to be. You turned it back on and you still had the same or similar problem. This is one of the reasons why that happens to you. I have a section of cable here that is 200 feet long. And I have 2 events in the center of the cable. Let's say they're splices. One at 100 feet, one at 105 feet. Would you agree that it should look something like this?
You would think that it should, yes.
You would think that it should, theoretically. Now, different TDRs, because of the way we do the programs, they may look a little bit different. They may look a little more rounded. They may look a little more sharp or more pronounced. But a splice and coaxial cable is a backwards S-curve. By backwards, I mean it goes down first. One at 100 feet, one at 105 feet. But here's the deal. You didn't get a signature that looked just like this. You got a signature that looks something more like this. One event right at 100 feet. Why? Well, I'm going to tell you why. Because you did not know that your TDR was in, let's say, 100 nanosecond pulse width. Okay? So in addition to the blind spot issue that we have that's at the very beginning of your TDR, that blind spot is going to be similar as it travels down the cable. So picture my rope analogy, this 50-foot wave that's traveling down your TDR, your cable. By the time it got to this first event at 100 feet, it was right there where the TDR said it should be. But the problem is this wave is 50 feet, even though that second event was just 5 feet from the first. It was lost in that wave. It was this hill behind the mountain that you could not see. The bottom line to that story is whichever TDR that you are using, make sure you always start off in the shortest pulse width that it has available, because there could be 2 events close together. Does that make sense?
Would you say the shortest pulse width available, or the shortest pulse width that is the greater than the length of your span?
The shortest pulse width that your TDR has available. You should always start off in the shortest pulse width and work your way up, because there could be 2 events. Just like there could be a problem within that first bend or that first rise, there also could be 2 events close together. You should always start off in the shortest and work your way up with whichever TDR you have available. Now, let me point something out that's really interesting about that, Mike. A lot of people believe that, let's just say we have TDRs. There's so many people that make a TDR. Some of them start at about $200 or $300, and others go up to about $3,000. A lot of people believe that the more expensive a TDR is, the more accurate it is. That is not true. The biggest difference in one TDR to the next has everything to do with these pulse widths and the problems that you are looking for. Let me give you an idea what I mean by that. If you're looking for just a cut in the cable, I said this earlier, any TDR in the world can find a cut in the cable. $100 TDR can find a cut in the cable. Why? Because that's the easiest thing in the world to find. You know, it's not the easiest thing in the world to find where water got into the cable or where water migrated to, or a squirrel chew, or just a nick in the cable or a ding in the hardline cable. And if you're looking for small faults close together, that's the biggest difference between, let's just say, a more expensive versus a less expensive TDR. And by the way, every TDR manufacturer makes a good, better, best TDR. I make a TDR that is under, that is somewhere around $1,000. It's not a bad TDR, of course it's not, but it is limited what it can find.
Well, I think that's with any set of test equipment, right? Is there are features.
What are the limitations? Yeah.
Yeah, that may be specific to certain applications, whether I'm using it just in a premise, in RG6 cables that'll have a limited distance versus potentially out in the network where I may have, 2,000 foot uninterrupted trunk spacing.
100%. Now, let me point out one more thing while we're talking about that. So let's talk the other thing that I don't list on this chart right here. The thing that makes a TDR frequency related is lots of times, Mike, how long have you been cable TV? More than 20 years?
Yes. Let's go with that.
Okay. Remember back in the old days in the analog world where we still do them, but we call them different things. We used to call them overbuilds and rebuilds because we were expanding our what am I trying to say? Our bandwidth. People used to frequently ask me, and they still ask me this question, Chuck, what frequency does your TDR transmit at? Now, let me tell you why people would ask me that question. It's not a dumb question, but I understand what they're getting at. First things first, what they would want to know is the bandwidth that we're going to, will your instrument support that? Understand a TDR doesn't care. A TDR in its most basic sense is just looking at the physical properties of this copper cable. And that hasn't changed in 100 years, okay? The TDR doesn't care what it is you're trying to put over this cable. The physical attributes are still there. Now, having said that though, a TDR, even though I said it's a time-based instrument, this is where it's a frequency-based instrument and it does matter. First things first, a TDR does not generate a frequency or a tone. It generates a pulse. And what is a pulse? A pulse is a burst or a wide range of frequencies. Each individual pulse width does have a fundamental frequency that's associated with it, but it's a burst, it's a wide range. The reason why my larger pulse widths go longer distances is because they contain a burst of lower frequencies. Lower frequencies travel farther. My smaller pulse widths, the reason why they don't go as far is because they contain higher frequencies. Big however, your smaller pulse widths do contain the higher frequencies, which find your smaller problems, which plague your higher bandwidth. What type of smaller problems am I talking about? I just mentioned it. Your squirrel chews, your nicks in the cable, your fresher water, which is harder to find than older water, by the way. So that's the other thing that you're paying for when your company invests in the $2,000 or the $3,000 TDRs. It's not just a distance thing. How small of a problem are you looking for? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And doubling down on the water, we've seen something that we've identified over the last few years using full band capture techniques called the water wave, right? So it's an impedance mismatch that has a very unique signature. And what's interesting about it is it's not just your typical periodic sine wave. It's a very jagged sine wave, and it has these periodic nulls at different frequencies where the water is pooled and created portions of high attenuation that affect different frequencies differently, right? So, little ones can't jump and big ones can't swim has been the saying for forever, right? So when you get water in a device, a couple of things can happen. Either you see that high end roll off, because of the higher attenuation at higher frequencies, or when the water pools and lays in a piece of cable, we can see this water wave that has higher attenuation at very specific frequencies. So frequency is important, right?
Absolutely.
And we also see it in passives that may have corrosion or defective with a frequency suck out. Well,
yes.
Any frequency, whatever type of signal it is, whether it be a TDR signal or an intended cable television signal, at that frequency is going to be attenuated because of that notch. So it is important, and I'm glad we're having this conversation, because testing any network it's always a good practice to use a wide range of troubleshooting techniques, right? Because there are limitations to almost all of them. So to get the fullest picture of everything that's going on in the transmission medium or the cable, it absolutely makes sense to use a wide array of pulse widths and troubleshooting techniques.
And if I may add to that, so if you have one of those high-end rollouts where you suspect there could be water in the cable, I'm going to guarantee you that if you're looking at one of the more entry-level TDRs, I don't care whose brand it is, if you want to talk about hit and miss, it's going to be more miss than hit. That's why you're going to want the upper end TDR of whoever's TDR you're using to try and pinpoint where that problem is. This is good stuff. We should go on the road together sometime, Mike.
We should.
Wait a minute, we have.
Okay. We have, yeah.
So,
what are you doing
those
in May? Come see us May 23rd.
Is that your Penn, Ohio show?
It is, yeah.
I just saw that pop up on the calendar. You know that's in the middle of show season for all of us, so.
I do.
I'm sure Springbok will be there, but I don't know my schedule yet. Okay, so that is the technical aspects of what the TDR is doing behind the scenes. What comes next is so that we can look at, before we do any button pushing, which I'm not worried about at this point, let's start to put, let's start to put some of this to work and start to analyze waveforms. And that's what we're going to do next, if that's okay by you.
Sure.